Sherlock Holmes and the Disappearance of Lady Blackwood. Chapter 1. The Woman Who Vanished Between Two Lamps. In the autumn of 1894, London lay beneath a veil of damp fog so thick that the gas lamps along the streets appeared as floating islands of gold, suspended within a sea of grey. The city seemed transformed into a phantom realm, where every silhouette might conceal a secret and every footstep might belong to a pursuer. It was upon such an evening that one of the most singular cases of my association with Sherlock Holmes first presented itself. I had returned late to Baker Street after attending a patient in Kensington. The clock upon the mantelpiece marked 8:30 when I entered our sitting room at 221B. Holmes was seated in his armchair beside the fire. The familiar scene greeted me, the violin resting upon the sofa, chemical apparatus cluttering the side table, and a thick haze of tobacco smoke hanging motionless beneath the ceiling. My friend appeared unusually animated. A newspaper lay open upon his knees. Without looking up, he remarked, "You have been delayed by exactly 42 minutes, Watson." I removed my coat. Surely that is not remarkable. London traffic can account for such delays. Holmes smiled faintly. "The traffic accounts for 20 minutes only." I sighed. "You have observed something." "Indeed." He folded the newspaper. "The clay upon your left boot originates from a construction site near Hyde Park. Your cuff bears a faint smear of iodine, indicating you treated a wound. Furthermore, your hat carries droplets of rain, although it has not rained in Baker Street since 6 o'clock. Therefore, you travelled westward after your consultation, and, the remaining 22 minutes, you stopped for supper." I stared. "How in heaven's name could you know that?" "The answer resides upon your moustache." "My moustache? A fragment of parsley?" I burst into laughter. "It is intolerable, Holmes." "No, my dear Watson, it is merely observation." He returned his attention to the newspaper. For several moments, only the crackling fire disturbed the silence. Then I noticed a card lying upon the mantel. It bore an elegant crest. "Expecting a visitor?" I asked. Holmes nodded. "A most intriguing one. Who is it?" "The Earl of Blackwood." The name was familiar. Lord Percival Blackwood, ranked among the wealthiest aristocrats in England. His family possessed extensive estates in Yorkshire and maintained considerable influence in political circles. "What business can he possibly have with us?" Holmes handed me the newspaper. A headline occupied the centre column. "Mysterious Disappearance of Lady Blackwood." I read rapidly. 3 nights earlier, Lady Eleanor Blackwood had vanished from her husband's London residence in Grosvenor Square. No servant had witnessed her departure. No carriage had been summoned. No ransom demand had appeared. The police had conducted extensive searches without result. London society buzzed with speculation. Some suspected an elopement. Others whispered of scandal. A few newspapers hinted at madness. Yet no explanation accounted for the peculiar circumstances. The article ended with a statement from Scotland Yard, expressing confidence that the matter would soon be resolved. Holmes chuckled. "Whenever Lestrade expresses confidence, I become deeply concerned. You think the police are mistaken. I think they are blind." "To what?" "That remains to be seen." Before I could inquire further, hurried footsteps sounded upon the stairs. Mrs. Hudson entered. "The Earl of Blackwood, Mr. Holmes." The visitor who followed her possessed the appearance of a man aging rapidly beneath great strain. He stood perhaps 50 years of age. His hair, once black, had become heavily streaked with silver. His handsome features appeared drawn and exhausted. Most striking were his eyes. They revealed genuine fear. He removed his gloves. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" Holmes inclined his head. "Please sit down, Lord Blackwood." The Earl lowered himself into a chair. For several moments he struggled to compose himself. At last he spoke. "My wife has disappeared. That much we know. Then perhaps you know more than Scotland Yard." Holmes steepled his fingers. "Begin at the beginning." The Earl nodded. Eleanor vanished on the evening of October 17th. From your residence? Yes. Under what circumstances? My wife retired to her private sitting room after dinner. At what hour? Approximately 8:30. And then? No one saw her again. The room fell silent. Holmes remained motionless. Describe the room. It overlooks the rear gardens. Were the doors locked? Yes. The windows? Locked from within. No signs of forced entry? None. Any secret passage? The Earl hesitated. No. Holmes's eyes sharpened. The pause had not escaped him, nor had it escaped me. Continue, said Holmes. A maid entered at 10 o'clock with tea, and found an empty room. The Earl swallowed. The lamp was still burning. Anything missing? Only my wife. I shifted uneasily. The answer sounded absurd, yet there was no trace of humour in Blackwood's expression. Holmes leaned forward. Nothing else. The Earl appeared confused. What do you mean? Clothing? Jewellery? Correspondence? Nothing. Her handbag? No. Travelling cloak? No. Holmes nodded slowly. A curious circumstance. The Earl's hands trembled. You must find her. Why? The question seemed to shock him. Because she is my wife. That is not sufficient. The Earl stared. Holmes continued calmly. Many husbands seek missing wives. Few arrive personally at Baker Street. Fewer still exhibit genuine terror. A long silence followed. The Earl's face paled. At length he whispered, because I believe someone intended her disappearance. Someone? Yes. Who? I do not know. Why do you suspect this? The Earl looked toward the fire. When he spoke again, his voice had become scarcely audible. Because 3 days before she vanished, Eleanor received a letter. Holmes sat upright. A threatening letter? No. What then? A warning. The Earl reached into his coat and produced an envelope. Holmes accepted it. The paper appeared ordinary. No signature accompanied the message. Only a single sentence had been written in black ink. The debt of Ravenshollow will soon be collected. Holmes read it twice. Then a remarkable expression crossed his face. Not surprise, not excitement, recognition. I knew that look well. It appeared whenever some hidden mechanism within a case suddenly revealed its existence. The debt of Ravenshollow, Holmes repeated quietly. The Earl leaned forward. You have heard of it? Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he rose and crossed to the window. The fog beyond the glass pressed against the pane like a living thing. For nearly a minute he stood in silence. Then he turned. Lord Blackwood, he said, I shall take your case. Relief flooded the Earl's features. Thank God. Holmes shook his head. I would not thank Providence yet. The room grew strangely cold. Why not? Asked Blackwood. Holmes looked once more at the letter. His voice emerged little above a whisper. Because, if this message means what I believe it means, he paused, then your wife's disappearance is only the beginning. At that moment, a church bell sounded somewhere within the fog-shrouded city. Its distant toll seemed less like a signal of time than a warning. And though I could not have known it then, the mystery of Lady Blackwood would soon lead us into one of the darkest and most elaborate conspiracies Sherlock Holmes had ever encountered. Chapter 2. The Locked Room in Grosvenor Square. The following morning broke beneath a curtain of low clouds that turned the London sky the colour of tarnished silver. Shortly after breakfast, Holmes and I departed Baker Street in a hired hansom bound for Grosvenor Square. Throughout the journey, my companion remained unusually silent. His long fingers were pressed together beneath his chin, while his keen grey eyes stared through the carriage window. I had learned that such periods of silence often concealed intense mental activity. At length I could no longer suppress my curiosity. You recognized something in that letter, Holmes? Perhaps. The reference to Ravenshollow? Yes. What is Ravenshollow? He glanced toward me. A place. A village. No. A house. Closer. I sighed. Must you always answer in riddles? My dear Watson, A riddle answered before its proper time ceases to be a riddle. The carriage rolled onward. A few moments later, Holmes spoke again. "Tell me, Watson, what is the first assumption made when a person disappears from a locked room? That they somehow escaped? Precisely. And if they did not? Then our difficulty becomes considerably more interesting." Before I could question him further, the carriage slowed before an imposing townhouse of pale stone. A line of black iron railings surrounded the property. Several constables remained stationed outside. The disappearance of Lady Blackwood had clearly attracted substantial attention. A butler admitted us immediately. The atmosphere inside the house felt oppressive. Servants moved quietly through the corridors. Faces appeared anxious. Voices remained hushed. The entire household seemed suspended in uncertainty. The Earl greeted us in the entrance hall. "You have come quickly." "Cases rarely improve with age," Holmes replied. "May we see the room?" "Of course." He led us upstairs. The second floor contained a suite of private chambers overlooking the rear gardens. At the end of a corridor stood a polished oak door. This was Lady Blackwood's sitting room. The Earl unlocked it. Holmes entered without a word. I followed closely behind. The chamber proved elegant yet intimate. Bookshelves lined one wall. A writing desk occupied another. Two upholstered chairs stood beside a small fireplace. Heavy curtains framed tall windows overlooking the garden. Nothing appeared disturbed. Nothing appeared unusual. And yet the room possessed an unmistakable sense of abandonment, as though its owner had vanished only moments before. Holmes slowly circled the chamber. His eyes moved continuously, examining, measuring, comparing. He touched nothing. Instead, he observed the carpet, the furniture, the fireplace, the windows, the ceiling. At last he stopped before the writing desk. What was found here? The Earl approached. The letter. The warning. Yes. Holmes nodded. Was anything else discovered? No. No diary. No. No personal correspondence. Nothing significant. Holmes opened several drawers. Most contained stationery and household accounts. One drawer remained locked. Whose key opens this? The Earl hesitated. My wife's. Has it been forced? No. Interesting. Holmes tapped the wood thoughtfully. Then he crossed to the windows. The locks remained firmly secured. He inspected them with a magnifying lens. Several minutes passed. Finally he smiled. A remarkable piece of work. The Earl stiffened. What do you mean? Someone wishes us to believe these windows were never opened. Were they? Holmes pointed. A minute scratch near the fastening mechanism. I leaned closer. The mark was almost invisible. I would never have noticed that. Naturally, Holmes replied. Few people would. The Earl frowned. Does it prove the window was opened? No. Then what does it prove? It proves someone wishes us to ask that question. The answer seemed to irritate him. Yet Holmes appeared unconcerned. He drew back the curtain. For the first time I noticed faint discoloration upon the fabric. A narrow streak, barely visible, brownish-grey. Holmes examined it carefully. What is that? I stepped forward. It resembles dust. No. He scraped a minute quantity onto a card. It is ash. Ash? Yes. From the fireplace. Not this fireplace. The Earl looked bewildered. Holmes pocketed the sample. Then he approached the hearth. The ashes inside appeared untouched. A servant clearly maintained the room with great care. Yet Holmes immediately knelt. After a few moments he extracted a tiny object. He held it up, a fragment of blue glass, no larger than a fingernail. The Earl stared. That was not there before. Holmes smiled. I am certain it was. What significance does it have? I have no idea. I knew instantly that he was lying. The glimmer in his eyes betrayed him. He had already formed some theory. Yet, as usual, he intended to reveal nothing until the proper moment. The Earl turned away in frustration. At that instant, the door opened. A man entered. He possessed broad shoulders, military bearing, and a thick moustache. His expression suggested limited patience and even less imagination. Inspector Lestrade, Holmes, Lestrade. The greeting contained the restrained politeness of two rivals who had spent many years proving one another wrong. The inspector nodded toward me. Dr. Watson. Good morning. Lestrade removed his gloves. I see you've come to inspect the famous locked room, and I see Scotland Yard has already solved the mystery. The inspector smiled smugly. As a matter of fact, we have nearly done so. The Earl turned sharply. You have? Indeed. Then where is my wife? Lestrade cleared his throat. That remains to be determined. Holmes coughed discreetly. I recognized the sound. It meant he was suppressing amusement. Lestrade ignored him. We have identified a likely suspect. Who? Asked the Earl. A man named Victor Hale. The name meant nothing to me. The Earl's reaction, however, was immediate. His face darkened. Hale? You know him? Unfortunately. Lestrade folded his arms. Then perhaps you neglected to mention that your wife maintained a correspondence with him. The Earl froze. A tense silence followed. Holmes watched closely. What sort of correspondence? He asked. Lestrade produced several letters. They were discovered yesterday. The Earl stared. Where? In Hale's residence. The inspector handed one to Holmes. I moved beside him and read. The contents appeared affectionate, intimate, certainly inappropriate for a married woman. The letters suggested a close relationship, possibly even a romantic one. The Earl sank heavily into a chair. My God, Lestrade nodded. The evidence is obvious. Is it? Holmes asked. The inspector frowned. A secret correspondence. A disappearance. A woman unhappy in her marriage. A compelling narrative. Exactly. But narratives and facts are rarely identical. Lestrade sighed. You always do this. Do what? Complicate matters. Holmes handed back the letter. My dear Lestrade, the world performs that service admirably without my assistance. The inspector crossed his arms. Victor Hale is missing. That statement altered the atmosphere instantly. Even Holmes appeared interested. Missing? Since the same night Lady Blackwood vanished. The Earl rose abruptly. You believe they ran away together? It seems likely. Impossible. Why? The Earl hesitated. For a fraction of a second I observed genuine confusion upon his face. Not anger, not embarrassment. Confusion, as though he had nearly revealed something. Then he mastered himself. It simply is. Holmes noticed the hesitation as well. Of that I was certain. Lestrade gathered his papers. We expect to locate Hale shortly. And when you do, Holmes asked, the mystery ends. Holmes smiled faintly. No, Lestrade. The inspector frowned. What do you mean? Holmes glanced around the room. At the locked drawer, the scratched window latch, the blue glass fragment, the ash upon the curtain. Then he looked toward the Earl. Finally he spoke. The mystery has not yet begun. As Lestrade departed, Holmes remained motionless beside the fireplace. Several minutes passed. Then he quietly remarked, Watson. Yes? Did you notice Lord Blackwood's reaction when Hale's name was mentioned? I did. What did you conclude? That he dislikes the man. Holmes sighed. An entirely reasonable answer. And wrong. Completely. What did you see? Holmes stared toward the window. I saw fear. Outside, beyond the glass, the fog drifted slowly across the garden, and for the briefest instant I thought I saw a figure standing among the trees, watching the house, watching us. Yet when I blinked, it was gone. Only the fog remained. Holmes had noticed it too. I knew because his expression changed. The hunt, I realized, had truly begun. Chapter 3. The Watcher in the Fog. Holmes wasted no time. The moment we emerged from Lady Blackwood's sitting room, he strode from the house with such speed that I was obliged to lengthen my pace considerably to keep beside him. The Earl followed us as far as the front entrance. Mr. Holmes, he called, have you discovered something? Holmes paused only briefly. I have discovered several things. Then my wife. may still be alive. The Earl visibly relaxed. Thank God. Holmes fixed him with a penetrating stare. Do not thank him yet. With that cryptic remark, he descended the steps and entered the square. I hurried after him. Holmes, I said, where are we going? To the garden. The rear garden. Precisely. You saw someone there. I did. And who was it? That, Watson, is the very question we intend to answer. We made our way around the side of the property and entered the extensive grounds behind the Blackwood residence. Though enclosed by high walls and dense hedges, the garden was surprisingly large. Ancient trees stood among carefully maintained paths. Flower beds stretched beneath wrought-iron trellises. At the far end lay a neglected corner where the fog gathered thickly beneath overhanging branches. Holmes headed directly toward it. You are certain someone was there? I rarely chase phantoms. He knelt beside a gravel path. At first I saw nothing unusual. Then he pointed. Footprints. Not clear impressions, but faint disturbances among the gravel. Someone had indeed stood there recently. What do you observe? Holmes asked. A man's footprints. Excellent. Encouraged, I continued. Perhaps a labourer. Why? The boots appear heavy. Holmes nodded. A fair deduction. Then he pointed toward a nearby patch of damp earth. Now, examine those. I bent closer. These impressions were much clearer. To my surprise, they differed significantly from the first. The soles were narrower, more refined, expensive footwear. A gentleman? I suggested. Yes. Then there were two people. Holmes smiled. There was only one. I stared. But the footprints were deliberately altered. He indicated a small depression in the mud. Observe the edge. I leaned forward. A faint scrape mark ran beside the print. The wearer attached a false sole over his shoe. To disguise himself? Exactly. Then the watcher expected pursuit or observation. Holmes rose. The distinction may prove important. We followed the trail deeper into the garden. It terminated abruptly near the rear wall. There, concealed among ivy, stood a narrow gate. Holmes examined the lock. It has been used recently. By the intruder? Undoubtedly. The gate opened onto a mews lane running behind several neighbouring properties. Traffic passed frequently through such lanes, a perfect route for entering or leaving unnoticed. Holmes surveyed the surroundings. Then his gaze settled upon a tiny object lodged between two stones. He bent and retrieved it, a brass button, plain, worn, apparently insignificant, yet his eyes brightened immediately. Interesting. What is it? Evidence. Of what? I haven't the faintest idea. Experience taught me that this answer usually meant the precise opposite. He slipped the button into his pocket. We had barely begun returning toward the house when a servant emerged from a side entrance. The man approached nervously. Mr. Holmes? Yes? A lady wishes to speak with you. A lady? She refuses to enter the house. Holmes exchanged a glance with me. Where is she? Waiting near the carriage gate. We found her standing beneath a large elm tree. She appeared perhaps 30 years of age. Her clothing suggested respectable employment. A governess or companion, perhaps. Though plainly dressed, she possessed an intelligent face and remarkably alert eyes. At our approach, she removed her gloves anxiously. Mr. Holmes, I am Sherlock Holmes. My name is Miss Clara Whitmore. Her gaze shifted toward the house. I served as Lady Blackwood's companion. Served? I resigned yesterday. The statement surprised us both. Immediately after the disappearance? Holmes asked. Yes. Why? Fear crossed her face. I no longer felt safe. Holmes studied her carefully. Please explain. Miss Whitmore hesitated. Several times she seemed about to speak before losing her courage. Finally she said, There are things happening in that house which nobody discusses. What sort of things? She lowered her voice. Strange visitors. Visitors? Men who arrived late at night. How many? 3. When? Over the past month. Did Lady Blackwood know them? I believe so. Holmes became instantly attentive. Describe them. The first was elderly, the second, tall and thin. The third wore a heavy coat and never removed his hat. Did any servant identify them? No. Did Lord Blackwood receive them? Miss Whitmore swallowed. No. Then who did? A pause followed. Lady Blackwood. Holmes and I exchanged a glance. This revelation altered the situation considerably. Privately? Holmes asked. Yes. Without her husband's knowledge? I believe so. What occurred during these meetings? I do not know. You never overheard a conversation? Only once. What did you hear? She looked around nervously before answering. A man said, "The debt cannot remain unpaid forever." Holmes's expression hardened instantly. The same phrase again. The debt. Raven's Hollow. Clearly they formed part of the same mystery. When did this conversation occur? He asked. About 2 weeks ago. Who spoke those words? I never saw his face. Why not? He stood in darkness. Holmes remained silent for several moments. Then he asked, "Why did you wait until now to tell us?" Miss Whitmore's composure nearly collapsed. Because I was afraid. Of whom? I don't know. The answer sounded sincere. Did Lady Blackwood ever confide in you? Once. What did she say? The woman closed her eyes briefly. When I asked whether something troubled her, she replied. Miss Whitmore hesitated. What exactly did she say? The past has finally found me. A chill ran through me. Even Holmes appeared thoughtful. The past? He repeated. Yes. Did she explain further? No. Miss Whitmore looked toward the house once more. She seemed terrified. Of what? I don't know. And you have told no one this? No one. Holmes nodded. You have done correctly. Relief appeared upon her face. Can you find her? I intend to. After she departed, we remained beneath the elm tree. The fog drifted lazily through the square. Carriages rattled in the distance. For a long time, Holmes said nothing. Then, the situation becomes increasingly curious. You believe Miss Whitmore? Entirely. Then Lady Blackwood was hiding something from her husband. Almost certainly. And these mysterious visitors? Connected. I considered the matter. The debt of Ravenshollow. Precisely. What is it? Holmes glanced toward me. For the first time since the case began, he appeared genuinely uncertain. That, Watson, is what troubles me. You know something about it. I know only fragments. Then tell me the fragments. He remained silent. At last he spoke. Many years ago, before the Blackwoods became prominent, there existed a property in Yorkshire known as Raven's Hollow Manor, a family estate. Yes. What happened there? Holmes looked toward the grey London sky. That is precisely what I intend to discover. At that moment a messenger boy came running through the gate. He carried a folded note. Mr. Holmes? Yes. The boy handed it over. It was given to me by a gentleman. Which gentleman? He wouldn't say. Holmes unfolded the paper. As he read, his face became unusually still, a dangerous stillness. I had seen it before, usually moments before something important occurred. What is it? I asked. Without answering, he handed me the note. Only 7 words appeared upon the page. Leave the matter alone or join her. No signature, no explanation, only a threat. For several moments neither of us spoke. Then Holmes folded the note and slipped it into his pocket. His eyes gleamed with unmistakable excitement. Excellent. I stared at him. Excellent? My dear Watson, whenever an adversary threatens me, it means I have begun walking in the correct direction. He turned toward the street. Come, where are we going now? A faint smile appeared upon his lips. To discover why someone is willing to commit crimes in London, to conceal what happened years ago at Raven's Hollow Manor. As we entered the fog-shrouded street, I could not shake the feeling that invisible eyes followed our every step, and somewhere in that vast city, whether captive or hiding, Lady Eleanor Blackwood remained at the centre of a mystery that was growing darker with every passing hour. Chapter 4. The Secrets of Ravenshollow Manor. That afternoon, upon our return to Baker Street, I observed a degree of concentration in Holmes that I had seldom witnessed even during the most perplexing investigations. He neither played the violin nor indulged in chemical experiments. Instead, he devoted himself entirely to research. Books accumulated around his chair, old newspapers covered the carpet, county records, peerage directories, land registries, and yellowing journals appeared from obscure corners of our rooms, as though summoned by magic. For nearly 3 hours he worked without interruption. I occupied myself with medical notes while occasionally observing his progress. At length Holmes uttered a low sound of satisfaction. "Aha!" I looked up. "You have discovered something, perhaps. Concerning Ravenshollow?" "Indeed." He held up a faded newspaper clipping. The paper had yellowed with age. The print was barely legible. Holmes handed it to me. I adjusted my spectacles and began reading. The article dated from 23 years earlier. It concerned a fire. A devastating blaze had consumed part of Ravenshollow Manor in Yorkshire. The damage proved extensive. Several servants suffered injuries. One man died. The article contained little else. "No mention of Lady Blackwood," I said. "Naturally." "Then why is it important?" Holmes leaned back. "Because the fire itself is unimportant." "Then what matters?" "The date." I examined it again. "What significance does it hold?" "Lady Eleanor Blackwood was 9 years old at the time." I frowned. "That cannot be a coincidence." "Precisely." He removed another document. This one proved far more interesting. A county property register. The original owner of Ravenshollow Manor had not been the Blackwood family at all. The estate belonged to a man named Augustus Fairmont. "Who was he?" I asked. "A wealthy industrialist." "What became of him?" "He died shortly after the fire." "Naturally?" Holmes smiled. "A most useful question. And the records disagree." I stared. "What do you mean?" "One document lists natural causes. Another, an accidental fall. Surely one must be correct. One would hope." Holmes tapped the papers thoughtfully. "When official records disagree, someone generally profits from the confusion." That statement struck me as profoundly Holmesian. He rose abruptly. "We are leaving." "Leaving? For Yorkshire?" I blinked. "When?" "Immediately. But the case is here in London. The disappearance occurred in London." "And the solution?" Holmes folded the documents. "The solution lies elsewhere." 2 hours later, we found ourselves aboard a northbound train racing through the English countryside. Rain streaked the windows. Dark clouds gathered above distant hills. Holmes spent much of the journey reviewing notes. Occasionally he made observations aloud. Most seemed disconnected. The handwriting upon the warning letter was deliberately disguised. Yes, the ash on the curtain did not originate from coal. No, wood ash. What significance does that hold? Unknown. Several minutes later, the blue glass fragment was handmade. How can you tell? The imperfections. Another pause. Then, Victor Hale may be a victim rather than a suspect. I looked up sharply. Why? I have not yet decided. Such conversations continued for hours. By evening we reached Yorkshire. A carriage awaited us at the station. The driver proved an elderly local man whose face resembled weathered leather. He nodded respectfully. "Ravenshollow Manor, gentlemen?" "Yes." The man's expression changed instantly. Not fear, something close to discomfort. "You'll be wanting the old place." "The old place?" Holmes asked. "There isn't much else left." As the carriage rolled onward through the darkening countryside, Holmes encouraged conversation. "Do people still speak of Ravenshollow?" The driver hesitated. "Sometimes." "Favourably?" "No, sir." "Why not?" The old man glanced over his shoulder. "Bad memories." "What sort of memories?" Another hesitation. "The fire. Only the fire." The driver gripped the reins tightly. "No, sir." "What else?" Silence lingered for several moments. Finally he answered, "The disappearance." Holmes immediately became alert. Whose disappearance? A little girl. I straightened in my seat. What little girl? The driver appeared surprised. You don't know? No. Everyone round here knows. Holmes leaned forward. Tell us. The old man swallowed. It happened before the fire. When? About 6 months earlier. What happened? A child vanished. Her name? Emily Fairmont. Holmes and I exchanged glances. The surname matched the former owner of Ravenshoe Hollow. How old was she? Holmes asked. 10. And she was never found? No, sir. The carriage continued through gathering darkness. Only the sound of rain accompanied us. At length Holmes spoke. Interesting. The driver nodded grimly. Folks said the place was cursed after that. Did they? Some still do. The conversation ended there. Yet I knew Holmes had seized upon the information instantly. A missing child, a fire, conflicting death records, a mysterious debt. The pieces remained disconnected, but they undoubtedly belonged to the same puzzle. Night had fully fallen when Ravenshoe Manor finally appeared. The sight proved striking. Even in darkness, the building dominated the surrounding landscape. Large portions had been restored after the fire. Others remained scarred. Blackened stonework still marked sections of the structure. Tall windows reflected moonlight between drifting clouds. The manor possessed the melancholy grandeur of a place burdened by history. As our carriage approached, a solitary lantern glowed near the entrance. A man emerged to greet us. He appeared perhaps 60 years old, thin, grey-haired, reserved. His bearing suggested long service. "Mr. Holmes?" he asked. "Yes, I am Benjamin Crow, the caretaker, since before the fire." Holmes's eyes sharpened. "Then you have been here a very long time, most of my life." We entered the manor. The interior felt oddly preserved. Portraits lined the walls. Ancient clocks ticked softly in distant corridors. The entire building seemed trapped between past and present. Crow led us toward a drawing room. A fire burned in the hearth. Its warmth contrasted sharply with the cold atmosphere beyond. "You knew Augustus Fairmont?" Holmes asked. "Yes." "And his daughter Emily?" The caretaker stopped walking. For the first time, genuine emotion crossed his face. Pain. Old pain. "Yes." "You remember her well?" "Everyone did." "Why?" Crow stared into the fire. "Because she was a good child." The room fell silent. Holmes studied him carefully. Then he asked, "What happened to her?" The caretaker's expression darkened. "No one knows." "That is not entirely true." Crow looked up sharply. Holmes continued calmly. "Someone always knows." For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then the caretaker sighed heavily. "You ask dangerous questions, Mr. Holmes." "I often do. And sometimes dangerous questions awaken dangerous memories." Holmes smiled faintly. "That has also occurred before." The old man moved closer to the fire. Outside, wind rattled against the windows. The manor creaked softly around us. Finally, Crow spoke. "When Emily disappeared, everyone searched. The grounds? Everywhere. The woods? Yes. The lake? Yes. No trace? None. What did people believe?" Crow hesitated. "That she had been taken." "By whom?" "No one knew." Holmes folded his arms. "And after the fire?" The caretaker's face grew pale. The questions stopped. "Why?" Crow looked directly at him. "Because people began dying." The words hung heavily in the room. Even the wind seemed to fall silent. "Who died?" Holmes asked quietly. The caretaker swallowed. "First Augustus Fairmont. Then a servant. And after that?" Another pause. "Others." Holmes's expression remained unreadable. Yet I recognized the look. The case had just crossed an invisible threshold. We were no longer investigating merely a disappearance. We had stepped into a mystery buried for more than 20 years. And somewhere within the shadows of Ravenshoe Manor lay the truth that connected a missing child, a deadly fire, and the vanishing of Lady Eleanor Blackwood. The question was no longer whether the past had returned. The question was how many people it intended to claim before revealing itself. Chapter 5. The Portrait in the Locked Gallery. The wind rose steadily throughout the evening. By midnight, Ravenshollow Manor seemed besieged by the elements. Rain lashed against the windows while powerful gusts swept across the moors surrounding the estate. The ancient structure groaned and settled like a living creature disturbed from uneasy sleep. Holmes appeared entirely unaffected. After supper, he persuaded Benjamin Crow to continue answering questions long after any ordinary host would have retired. The caretaker proved reluctant. Not dishonest, I thought, but burdened. Every inquiry concerning the events of 23 years earlier seemed to awaken memories he would gladly have left undisturbed. At last, Holmes leaned back in his chair. "You have told us much about the disappearance of Emily Fairmont." Crow nodded. "As much as I know." "Not quite." The old man's eyes narrowed. "What have I omitted?" Holmes studied him for a moment. "The thing you fear." Silence settled heavily over the room. The fire crackled. Rain rattled against the panes. Crow looked away first. "There are some matters better forgotten." "I have rarely found that to be true." The caretaker sighed. "Perhaps that is because you are Sherlock Holmes." "Perhaps." Crow rose slowly. For several moments he stood beside the fireplace. Then he made a decision. I saw it happen. A long struggle, ending in reluctant surrender. "Come with me." Without another word, he took up a lantern. Holmes immediately stood. I followed. Crow led us through a maze of corridors and staircases, seldom used by modern occupants. Dust coated the floors. White sheets covered forgotten furniture. The deeper we ventured into the manor, the stronger became the impression that we were entering a preserved fragment of the past. At length we reached a heavy oak door reinforced with iron bands. A large key protruded from the lock. Crow paused. "No one enters here. What room is this?" I asked. "The gallery." He unlocked the door. The hinges groaned. A stale odour drifted outward. The lantern light revealed a long chamber lined with portraits. Generations of owners gazed down from gilded frames. Noblemen, ladies, children, military officers, all frozen within their painted worlds. The effect was strangely unsettling. As the lantern moved, shadows danced across dozens of watchful faces. "This room was closed after the fire," Crow explained. "Why?" Holmes asked. The caretaker hesitated. "Because Mrs. Fairmont requested it." "Emily's mother?" "Yes." "What reason did she give?" "None." Holmes slowly advanced into the gallery. His eyes moved from portrait to portrait. Then he stopped. At the far end of the room hung a painting unlike the others. A portrait of a young girl. She could not have been more than 10 years old. Dark hair framed a bright, intelligent face. Her expression seemed unusually lively for a formal Victorian portrait. Even after 2 decades, the artist had somehow preserved the impression of a child, moments away from laughter. "Emily Fairmont," Holmes said quietly. Crow nodded. "Yes." We approached the painting. A small brass plaque confirmed the identification. Emily Fairmont, 1871. I studied the face carefully. There was something oddly familiar about it. Something I could not immediately identify. Beside me, Holmes remained unusually still, his eyes fixed upon the portrait. "Remarkable." "What is remarkable?" I asked. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned toward Crow. "When was this painted?" "Several months before she disappeared." "By whom?" "A London artist." Holmes nodded. Then he examined the frame itself. His fingers traced its edges. Suddenly he crouched. "What is this?" I joined him. A faint scratch marked the wood near the lower corner. At first glance it appeared insignificant, yet Holmes studied it with great interest. The mark resembled a symbol. 2 intersecting lines enclosed within a circle, deliberately carved. Not accidental. Crow's face paled. "That wasn't there before." Holmes looked up sharply. You are certain? Absolutely. When was this room last opened? Nearly 3 months ago. By whom? Only myself. Holmes rose. Interesting. His attention shifted toward the wall behind the portrait. He tapped lightly. A hollow sound answered, very different from the surrounding stone. Holmes tapped again, then again. The difference became unmistakable. There is a cavity behind this wall. Crow stared. There cannot be. Yet there is. The caretaker looked genuinely astonished. I've worked here 40 years. Then perhaps the builder succeeded in his purpose. What purpose? To conceal something. Holmes examined the edges of the paneling. Within moments he located a hidden latch. A section of wall swung inward. Behind it lay a narrow recess. Crow gasped. The chamber beyond could not have measured more than 3 feet in width. Dust coated every surface. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling. For many years no human hand had disturbed it. At the rear stood a small wooden box. Nothing more. Holmes carefully lifted it. The lock had long since rusted away. He opened the lid. Inside lay several papers tied together with faded ribbon. A child's diary. The 3 of us stared silently. The discovery felt momentous, as though some forgotten voice had suddenly reached across the years. Holmes removed the first page. The handwriting belonged unmistakably to a child. Large letters, occasional spelling errors, simple observations. For nearly 15 minutes we read. Most entries appeared innocent. Descriptions of gardens, pets, lessons, family gatherings. Then Holmes stopped. A particular page had caught his attention. His expression hardened. "What is it?" I asked. Without speaking, he handed me the diary. The entry was dated 6 weeks before Emily's disappearance. I read aloud. "Father says I must never speak about the cellar room. Mr. Ashcombe became angry today. I heard them arguing again. Mother cried afterward. They think I do not understand, but I know something terrible happened before we came here. I heard Father say the debt will never be paid." The room became utterly silent. The debt. Again. Always the same phrase. Always connected to Ravenshollow. Holmes took the diary back. His eyes moved rapidly over subsequent pages. Another passage caught his attention. This one had been written only days before Emily vanished. He read it aloud. "The man with the blue lantern returned tonight. I saw him through the window. Father says if anyone asks, I must pretend he was never here." The blue lantern. Immediately my thoughts returned to the fragment of blue glass discovered in Lady Blackwood's sitting room. I saw that Holmes had made the same connection. His eyes gleamed. For the first time since arriving at Ravenshollow, several pieces of the puzzle had begun fitting together. Yet, before I could question him further, a loud crash echoed somewhere within the manor. Everyone froze. The sound had come from above us. A door slamming. Or perhaps something falling. Crow turned pale. "There is no one else here." Holmes seized the lantern. "Stay behind me." Without hesitation he hurried from the gallery. We followed. The corridor beyond lay empty. Wind howled through distant passages. The manor seemed darker than before, more oppressive. Then came another sound. Footsteps, running footsteps. Somewhere on the floor above. Holmes sprang toward the staircase. By the time we reached the upper landing, however, the noise had ceased. Nothing moved, nothing stirred, only silence. Yet Holmes knelt immediately beside a corridor window. Rainwater had gathered upon the stone sill. Across it appeared a single clear impression. A handprint, fresh, very fresh. Someone had indeed been there, watching us, listening. Perhaps only moments earlier. Holmes examined the mark carefully. Then he smiled. Not with amusement, with anticipation. The game becomes increasingly interesting. "Who was it?" I asked. "An excellent question." He pointed toward the handprint. Something had been left behind. A small dark object. I picked it up. A piece of cloth. Black velvet. Expensive material. Torn recently. Holmes accepted it. His expression grew thoughtful. "Watson." "Yes?" How many people do you suppose know about this hidden diary? Very few. Precisely. He slipped the velvet fragment into his pocket, and someone was willing to risk discovery in order to learn whether we had found it. The realization sent a chill through me. We were no longer merely uncovering secrets, we were disturbing them, and somewhere within Ravenshollow Manor, a hidden observer had just learned that Sherlock Holmes was drawing dangerously close to the truth. The question remained whether that observer intended merely to watch or to act. Chapter 6. The Man Called Ashcombe. The events in the locked gallery ensured that neither Holmes nor I enjoyed much sleep that night. The discovery of Emily Fairmont's diary had transformed the investigation. Until then, Ravenshollow's connection to Lady Blackwood's disappearance had rested largely upon suggestion and coincidence. Now tangible links had emerged. The mysterious debt, the blue lantern, the hidden visitors, the concealed diary. Most disturbing of all was the certainty that someone had been secretly observing our progress. I found Holmes awake before dawn. He sat near the window of our room, wrapped in his dressing gown, a pipe between his fingers. The first pale light of morning crept across the moors. "What hour did you retire?" I asked. "I did not. You have been awake all night." "Thinking." "With results?" "Several." He handed me a page from the diary. During the night he had evidently reread it numerous times. A particular entry had been marked. I read, "Mr. Ashcombe frightened mother today. Father told him to leave. He laughed and said, 'Nobody leaves Ravenshollow until the debt is settled.'" I lowered the diary. This Ashcombe appears central to everything. Indeed. Who was he? A question we shall answer today. How? Holmes rose. By speaking with those who remember him. Crow joined us for breakfast. The caretaker appeared exhausted. The previous night's discoveries had clearly disturbed him. Holmes wasted little time. Who was Ashcombe? Crow's reaction proved immediate. The spoon slipped from his hand. It struck the table with a sharp metallic sound. For several moments he said nothing. Then, "I hoped that name would never be spoken again." Holmes leaned forward. "Then you know him." "I knew him." "Tell us." The old man stared into his tea. "He arrived around 2 years before Emily disappeared." "What position did he hold?" "Officially?" "Yes. Estate manager." "And unofficially?" Crow hesitated. "Something more." "What?" "I never knew." "Did Fairmont trust him?" "At first." "What changed?" The caretaker's face darkened. "Arguments. Frequent? Constant. About what?" "Money." Holmes nodded. "The debt." Crow looked up sharply. "You know about that." "We know the phrase." The caretaker seemed uneasy. "I wish I knew more." "You do." Crow sighed heavily. "Only fragments." "Fragments are often sufficient." The old man rose and crossed to a cabinet. After searching briefly, he removed a small ledger. Its leather cover had cracked with age. This belonged to Fairmont. Holmes accepted it carefully. "What is it?" "Estate accounts." "Why keep it?" "Because nobody wanted it." Holmes opened the ledger. For several minutes he examined the entries. Then his eyes narrowed. "What is it?" I asked. "Remarkable." He turned several pages toward me. A single name appeared repeatedly throughout the records. Ashcombe. Large payments, transfers, loans, private expenditures. The sums were extraordinary. "Good heavens," I said. "Quite. Fairmont paid him all this, so it appears." "Why?" Holmes tapped a particular entry. "Because beside one payment appeared a handwritten note, only 4 words. For silence regarding Ravenshollow." A chill passed through the room. Crow stared. "I never noticed that." Holmes smiled faintly. Most people would not. The implication was obvious. Ashcombe possessed information powerful enough to extract enormous sums from the estate owner. Blackmail, or something very close to it. "What happened to him?" I asked. Crow answered quietly. "He vanished." "When?" "Shortly after the fire." "Never seen again?" "No." Holmes closed the ledger. "Interesting. For the remainder of the morning we visited the nearby village. Ravenshoe Hollow itself consisted of little more than a church, several cottages, and a handful of shops clustered around a small square. News of our arrival had already spread. In rural communities, strangers rarely remain anonymous, particularly when accompanied by Sherlock Holmes. Our first conversations yielded little. Most villagers remembered the Fairmont family. Few remembered Ashcombe fondly. One elderly woman described him as cruel. A former stable hand called him dangerous. A retired schoolmaster simply referred to him as the man everyone feared. Yet none could explain why. Shortly after noon, we received our first genuine breakthrough. The village postmistress, a remarkably sharp woman named Mrs. Denton, recalled something unusual. Ashcombe received letters, she said. Many men receive letters, Holmes observed. Not like these. How were they different? She frowned thoughtfully. They came from London. Frequently? Every month. Did you notice the sender? Only once. Holmes immediately became attentive. And? The envelope bore the name Blackwood. For a moment, nobody spoke. Even Mrs. Denton seemed startled by the significance. The Earl's family? I asked. She nodded. I believe so. Holmes remained silent. His mind was clearly racing. At last he asked, Do you remember the initials? The woman considered. Yes. A.B. Holmes exchanged a glance with me. Augustus Blackwood, the Earl's father. The realization struck us simultaneously. The Blackwoods had been connected to Ravenshoe Hollow decades before Lady Eleanor vanished. The connection extended far deeper than we had suspected. Much deeper. By late afternoon we returned to the manor. Holmes spent the journey in silence. Upon arrival he immediately locked himself inside the library. There he spread documents across an enormous table. The diary, the ledger, property records, newspaper clippings. For nearly 2 hours he worked. Then suddenly he rose. Watson. I looked up. What is it? Observe this. He pointed toward a timeline he had constructed. The pattern became clear almost instantly. Emily Fairmont disappeared. 6 months later, the manor fire occurred. Shortly afterward, Ashcombe vanished. Then Augustus Fairmont died. Years later, Eleanor Blackwood married into the Blackwood family. Now she had disappeared. The sequence seemed impossible to ignore. Yet one question remained. Where does Lady Blackwood fit? Holmes stared at the timeline. That is precisely the difficulty. At that moment, a knock sounded at the door. Crowe entered hurriedly. His face had gone pale. Mr. Holmes, what is it? A telegram. Holmes accepted it. As he read, his expression changed instantly. The familiar look appeared, the one that signaled danger, real danger. From London? I asked. Yes. News of Lady Blackwood? Not exactly. He handed me the telegram. The message came from Inspector Lestrade. It contained only a few words. Victor Hale found. Murdered last night. I read it twice, then a third time. The room seemed suddenly colder. Good heavens. Holmes folded the telegram slowly. So, his voice remained calm. Too calm. The stakes have increased. You believe Hale knew something? I am now certain of it. And someone killed him to prevent him speaking. Precisely. Crowe looked alarmed. What does that mean? Holmes turned toward the darkening windows. Outside, evening shadows stretched across the moors. It means, he said quietly, that the person behind Lady Blackwood's disappearance is no longer merely hiding secrets. He paused, then added, They are eliminating witnesses. A heavy silence followed. The investigation had entered a new and dangerous phase. For the first time since the case began, murder stood openly upon the board. And somewhere beyond the walls of Ravenshoe Hollow Manor, a killer had just made their move. The question was whether Holmes could uncover the truth before another witness disappeared forever. Chapter 7. Murder in Whitechapel. The telegram from Inspector Lestrade altered the entire complexion of the case. Until that moment, Sherlock Holmes had pursued a disappearance linked to a decades-old mystery. Now murder had entered the equation. A living witness had been silenced, and if Holmes's reasoning proved correct, Victor Hale would not be the last. Within an hour, Holmes had arranged our return to London. The next available train carried us south through the night. As the countryside rushed past beyond the carriage windows, I attempted to organize the growing mass of facts. Lady Eleanor Blackwood had vanished. Victor Hale had vanished. Now Victor Hale was dead. 23 years earlier, Emily Fairmont had vanished. A fire had ravaged Ravenshollow Manor. A man named Ashcombe had disappeared, and through every layer of the mystery wound the same recurring phrase, the debt of Ravenshollow. No matter how often I examined the facts, they refused to assemble into a coherent picture. Holmes, however, seemed increasingly confident. His eyes remained closed for much of the journey. To a casual observer, he might have appeared asleep. I knew better. His mind was working, relentlessly. At dawn, we arrived in London. Lestrade met us directly at Paddington Station. The inspector looked unusually grave. Bad business, Holmes, so I gathered. Lestrade led us toward a waiting cab. The body still at the scene. Whitechapel. The inspector nodded. An abandoned warehouse. As we travelled eastward through the city, the atmosphere seemed to darken with each passing street. Whitechapel possessed a character entirely different from the elegant squares of the West End. The poverty, the crowds, the narrow alleys, everything appeared harsher, more desperate. Eventually we arrived before a neglected brick building near the docks. Several constables guarded the entrance. Lestrade led us inside. The warehouse stood nearly empty. Dust coated the floor. Broken crates lay scattered among the shadows. A grey morning light filtered through dirty windows overhead. Near the centre of the room rested a covered form. Holmes approached silently. Lestrade removed the cloth. Victor Hale lay upon his back. He appeared approximately 35 years of age, well-dressed, clean-shaven. His features suggested intelligence and refinement, yet death had frozen them into an expression of profound surprise, as though the final attack had come unexpectedly. Holmes knelt immediately. What caused death? A knife. Single wound? Yes. Professional? Lestrade shrugged. The doctor believes so. Holmes examined the body carefully. Several minutes passed. Then he looked toward the victim's hands. Interesting. What? Asked Lestrade. His fingernails. The inspector frowned. What about them? There is dirt beneath them. Many men have dirt beneath their nails. Not this sort. Holmes scraped a tiny sample onto a card. I observed a faint reddish tint. Clay, I suggested. Not ordinary clay. His eyes brightened. Remarkable. Lestrade sighed. You always find things remarkable. Because they usually are. The inspector folded his arms impatiently. Well? Holmes ignored him. Instead, he continued examining the corpse. Suddenly he froze. Ah, what now? Without speaking, he reached inside the victim's coat. A hidden pocket. From it, he extracted a folded scrap of paper. Lestrade looked astonished. We searched him. Not thoroughly. Holmes unfolded the paper. Several lines had been written hastily. Part of the message had been smeared by blood. Only fragments remained legible. I read over his shoulder. The cellar. Emily knew. Blackwood must never. Ashcombe still. The remainder had become unreadable. A heavy silence followed. The note felt enormously important. Perhaps the most important evidence yet discovered. Lestrade looked excited. What does it mean? Holmes folded the paper carefully. It means Victor Hale intended to tell someone the truth. And failed. Exactly. The inspector rubbed his hands together. So Hale was involved. Certainly. Perhaps he kidnapped Lady Blackwood. Holmes sighed. My dear Lestrade. What? You possess an extraordinary gift. For what? Choosing the wrong conclusion. The inspector scowled. If Hale wasn't responsible, why was he hiding? Because someone wanted him dead. Lestrade opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. For once, he lacked a convincing answer. Holmes rose. "Tell me about the discovery." "A dock worker found the body." "When?" "Shortly before midnight." "No witnesses?" "None." "Any unusual visitors seen nearby?" Lestrade hesitated. "As a matter of fact, yes." Holmes turned immediately. "Go on." "A woman." "What woman?" "Nobody knows." The inspector produced a statement. "One witness claims he saw a lady leaving the warehouse district around 10 o'clock. A description? Dark clothing, age, unknown, face. He couldn't see it." Holmes nodded slowly. "And you dismissed it?" "Naturally, naturally." The sarcasm went unnoticed. Holmes moved toward the warehouse entrance. His attention had shifted elsewhere. Outside the building lay a narrow alley. Mud covered much of the ground. The previous night's rain had preserved numerous footprints. Most appeared useless. A chaotic mixture. Yet Holmes immediately located a particular set. He crouched, examined them, then smiled. I recognized that smile. A discovery had been made. "What do you see?" I asked. "A woman." Lestrade groaned. "Based on footprints?" "Among other things." He pointed. The impressions revealed small but expensive footwear. The heel pattern appeared distinctive, not common, certainly not worn by working-class residents of Whitechapel. Holmes followed the trail several yards, then stopped abruptly. At the base of a wall lay a tiny object. He picked it up, a fragment of black velvet. My heart skipped. The same material, the very same material we had discovered at Ravenshollow Manor. Holmes slipped it into his pocket without comment. Yet I knew the significance instantly. The watcher in Ravenshollow, the woman seen leaving Whitechapel, the fragment of velvet. All connected. The question was how. We had nearly reached the cab when a young constable came running toward us. "Inspector!" Lestrade turned. "What is it?" "A message arrived." "For me?" "No, sir." The constable looked toward Holmes. "For Mr. Holmes." A sealed envelope changed hands. Holmes examined it. No name appeared upon the outside, only his address. Nothing more. He opened it. Inside rested a single sheet. I watched his expression carefully. For the first time since the investigation began, genuine surprise crossed his face. "What is it?" I asked. Without speaking, he handed me the letter. The handwriting differed entirely from the previous threats. Elegant, precise, feminine. The message contained only one sentence. "If you wish to find Lady Blackwood alive, come alone to St. Jude's Cemetery tonight at 11. No signature, no explanation, only an instruction. Lestrade stared. "Well?" Holmes folded the paper. "Well, what?" "You're not actually going." "Oh, I most certainly am." The inspector looked horrified. "It could be a trap." Holmes smiled. "My dear Lestrade." "Yes, I sincerely hope it is." The inspector threw up his hands in frustration, but I knew Holmes well enough to understand. The letter represented the first direct contact from someone inside the conspiracy. After days of chasing shadows, one of the players had finally stepped forward. Whether ally or enemy remained uncertain. Yet by 11 o'clock that night, among the tombs and fog of St. Jude's Cemetery, we would at last come face to face with someone who knew the truth. And I could not rid myself of the uneasy suspicion that the encounter would change everything. For the first time, Lady Eleanor Blackwood no longer seemed merely a missing person. She seemed like the key to a secret someone had been willing to protect for more than 20 years. A secret worth blackmail, a secret worth murder, and perhaps, before this was over, a secret worth killing again. Chapter 8. The Woman Among the Graves. The remainder of that day passed in a state of tense anticipation. Holmes revealed little concerning his thoughts. Indeed, he spent much of the afternoon in apparent idleness, reclining upon the sofa at Baker Street with his eyes closed while dense clouds of tobacco smoke drifted toward the ceiling. Experience had taught me that such periods often concealed furious mental activity. Several times I attempted conversation. Each effort produced little success. Do you believe the letter is genuine? Possibly. Do you believe Lady Blackwood still lives? Possibly. Do you believe the writer intends to help us? Possibly. By 6 o'clock I abandoned the attempt. At 9:30, Holmes finally stirred. Without a word he crossed to his bedroom. When he emerged 20 minutes later, I scarcely recognized him. His appearance had undergone one of those remarkable transformations for which he possessed an almost theatrical talent. A grey beard concealed much of his face. Tinted spectacles obscured his eyes. His shoulders appeared stooped. Even his manner of walking had changed. He now resembled an aging clergyman rather than the most formidable consulting detective in Europe. You intend to go disguised? Naturally. And alone? Officially. I frowned. Officially? Holmes smiled. My dear Watson, have I ever succeeded in preventing you from accompanying me? Rarely. Then I see little reason to begin tonight. At 10:30, we departed Baker Street. A cold mist hung over London. The city seemed quieter than usual. Perhaps it was merely my imagination. The events of recent days had sharpened my awareness of every shadow and every footstep. St. Jude's Cemetery occupied a neglected corner of Southwark. The church itself had long since fallen into disuse. Only the graveyard remained. Ancient headstones leaned at odd angles. Weeds choked many of the pathways. Large yew trees cast deep shadows across the grounds. The place possessed an atmosphere of profound melancholy. At 5 minutes before 11, Holmes and I entered through the rusted gate. No one appeared in sight. Fog drifted silently among the graves. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell marked the quarter hour. Holmes consulted his watch. Patience. We moved deeper into the cemetery. At length we reached a small stone chapel near the rear boundary. Its roof had partially collapsed. Moonlight filtered through broken masonry. The ruin seemed an ideal location for clandestine meetings. Too ideal. I touched the revolver concealed beneath my coat. Holmes noticed. An excellent precaution. You expect trouble. I always expect trouble. Then he suddenly raised a hand. A figure had emerged from the fog. A woman. She approached cautiously. Dark clothing concealed much of her appearance. A veil covered her face. For several moments none of us spoke. Finally the stranger stopped. You came. Her voice sounded educated, refined. Certainly not the voice of a criminal from Whitechapel. Holmes inclined his head. You expected otherwise? I hoped otherwise. Why? Because you are in danger. Holmes smiled faintly. That possibility has been mentioned before. The woman glanced nervously into the darkness. You do not understand. Then enlighten me. For several seconds she seemed to struggle with herself. Then, they are watching. Who? The people behind Ravenshollow. At last. A direct reference. The first from someone willing to speak openly. Holmes remained calm. Who are they? The woman hesitated. I cannot tell you everything. Why not? Because I would be killed. Someone has already murdered Victor Hale. Her eyes widened. You know. We know he is dead. The woman lowered her gaze. Then there is even less time than I feared. Holmes took a step forward. Who are you? A long silence followed. At last she removed her veil. I recognized her immediately. So do I, Holmes said quietly. The woman nodded. I suspected you would. It was Clara Whitmore, Lady Blackwood's former companion, the very woman who had approached us in Grosvenor Square. You sent the letter? I asked. Yes. Why all the secrecy? Her expression darkened. Because they know I have been speaking to you. Who? The people searching for Eleanor. Holmes studied her carefully. Searching. Yes. Then Lady Blackwood escaped them. The woman's eyes widened. For the first time, genuine surprise appeared. How did you know? Holmes smiled. Because you chose that word. Clara stared, then slowly nodded. You're right. My heart quickened. Lady Blackwood is alive, yes. The answer echoed through the ruined chapel. For a moment I scarcely believed it. After days of uncertainty, we finally possessed confirmation. Holmes remained composed. Where is she? I don't know. You just said she escaped. She did. From whom? The woman glanced over her shoulder once more, then lowered her voice. From the people who abducted her. Why? Because she discovered the truth. What truth? Again hesitation. Again fear. Then, Emily Fairmont. The name hung in the cold air. Holmes's expression sharpened instantly. What about Emily? Clara swallowed. She never died. For several seconds nobody spoke. The statement seemed impossible. Emily Fairmont had vanished more than 2 decades earlier. If alive, she would now be a grown woman. Yet something in Clara's face convinced me she believed every word. Holmes folded his arms. Continue. Lady Blackwood learned it accidentally. Learned what? That Emily survived. How? I don't know. And that discovery led to her kidnapping. Yes. Holmes became very still. Whenever he approached a significant conclusion, a peculiar stillness overtook him. I saw it now. His mind was racing, rapidly assembling pieces that remained invisible to me. Then Clara spoke again. There is something else. What? The man called Ashcombe. Even Holmes seemed alert at the mention. What about him? He never disappeared. The statement struck with the force of a pistol shot. I stared. Impossible. No. Clara's voice trembled. He's alive. The fog seemed suddenly colder. Ashcombe alive. After 23 years. The architect of the mystery. The blackmailer. The shadow behind Raven's Hollow. If Clara spoke truly, the entire investigation had just changed. Holmes stepped closer. Where is he? I don't know. You have seen him? Yes. When? 3 weeks ago. Are you certain? I can never forget his face. Holmes remained silent. Then, how old would he be now? Perhaps 70. Yet still active. Very active. A distant sound interrupted us. Footsteps. Not one pair. Several. Moving through the fog. Clara turned pale instantly. They found me. Holmes's eyes flashed. How many? I don't know. The footsteps grew louder, closer, approaching from multiple directions. Whoever they were, they intended to surround the chapel. Holmes acted immediately. Watson. Yes? Take Miss Whitmore. What about you? I shall follow. The footsteps continued drawing nearer. Shapes began appearing among the graves. Dark figures, at least 4, possibly more. Clara's voice shook. They've come to silence me. Holmes moved toward the ruined doorway. For a brief moment he resembled a hunter preparing to confront dangerous prey. His eyes gleamed, not with fear, with excitement. On the contrary, he said quietly, they have come at precisely the right moment. Then he stepped into the fog, and the trap that had been tightening around the mystery of Raven's Hollow finally began to spring. Yet whether Holmes was the hunter or the hunted remained very much uncertain. Chapter 9. The Shadow of Ashcombe. For several moments after Holmes disappeared into the fog, I remained frozen beside Clara Whitmore within the ruined chapel. Dark figures moved among the gravestones. The drifting mist concealed their features while magnifying their menace. One moment they appeared distant. The next they seemed alarmingly close. Clara gripped my arm. We must go. I confess that every instinct urged me to follow Holmes. Yet I knew my duty. Holmes had entrusted Clara's safety to me. Reluctantly, I nodded. Come. We slipped through a narrow opening in the rear wall of the chapel. A neglected pathway wound between ancient tombs toward a secondary gate. The fog provided welcome concealment. Several times we paused while shadowy forms passed nearby. Whoever pursued us searched methodically, not frantically. That detail struck me as significant. They behaved like men carrying out instructions. Professionals, not common criminals. At last we reached the outer wall. A small iron gate stood partially hidden behind overgrown ivy. We slipped through. The street beyond appeared deserted. Only then did I allow myself to breathe more freely. "Where now?" Clara asked. "Baker Street." She shook her head immediately. "No. Why not? They know that address. Then where?" Before she could answer, rapid footsteps approached. I turned sharply. A figure emerged from the fog. My hand moved instinctively toward my revolver. Then I recognized him. Holmes. Entirely uninjured. Entirely composed. He appeared almost disappointed. "Only 3 of them," he remarked. "3?" I exclaimed. "I had hoped for more." Clara stared. "You fought them?" "My dear Miss Whitmore, I merely introduced myself." "What happened?" "They ran." I could not suppress a smile. Many dangerous men had discovered, to their lasting regret, that Sherlock Holmes was not easily intimidated. Holmes adjusted his coat. "Now then." His eyes settled upon Clara. "You have told us Ashcombe lives." "Yes." "You have told us Emily Fairmont survived." "Yes." "But you have not told us the most important fact." Fear crossed her face. "What fact?" "Why Lady Blackwood became involved." The woman lowered her gaze. For several moments she remained silent. Then she spoke quietly. "Because Eleanor was searching for her." Holmes nodded slowly. "Emily." "Yes." The answer struck me immediately. Of course. Lady Blackwood had not simply stumbled upon the mystery. She had investigated it. Deliberately. "Why?" Holmes asked. Clara hesitated. Then, "Because Emily Fairmont was her mother." The world seemed to stop. Even Holmes remained motionless. The revelation altered everything. Every assumption. Every theory. Every relationship. "Good God," I whispered. Clara nodded. "Eleanor discovered the truth only 6 months ago. I struggled to comprehend it. Then Lady Blackwood was not born a Blackwood. No. Or a Fairmont. No." Holmes folded his arms. "Explain." Clara took a deep breath. "The story begins after Emily disappeared." The fog drifted around us. The deserted street suddenly felt like a stage upon which the final act of a tragedy was beginning. "Go on," Holmes said. "Emily was kidnapped." "By whom?" "I don't know." "You are certain?" "Yes." "Continue." "She was hidden for years." "Where?" "I never learned." Holmes nodded. "And eventually, she escaped." My pulse quickened. The mystery that had remained buried for decades was finally emerging. "What happened afterward?" I asked. Clara looked toward the darkness. "As far as I know, Emily never returned to Ravenshollow." "Why not?" "Because she believed everyone she loved was dead." The statement carried a terrible sadness. Holmes remained silent, allowing her to continue. "Years later she married. Under another name, yes. And Lady Blackwood. Eleanor was her daughter." A complicated picture began forming in my mind. Emily Fairmont survives, lives under a false identity, has a daughter. That daughter grows up unaware of her true heritage, then somehow discovers it. Holmes was already several steps ahead. When did Emily die? 4 years ago. And before her death, she revealed everything to Eleanor. There it was. The missing link. The reason Lady Blackwood had become involved. The reason she had investigated Ravenshollow. The reason someone wanted her silenced. Eleanor inherited the secret, Holmes said. "Yes." And began searching. "Yes." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. For a moment I thought the mystery solved. Then another realization struck me. If Emily survived, I said, then why was everyone convinced she disappeared forever? Clara's expression darkened. Because someone wanted it that way. The answer carried enormous significance. Emily had not merely vanished. Her disappearance had been maintained. Protected, hidden. For 23 years. That required power, organization, planning. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Precisely. Then he asked the question I should have asked sooner. How do you know all this? Clara hesitated. The hesitation lasted too long. Holmes noticed immediately. So, His voice softened. "You have not told us everything. No. What are you concealing?" The woman closed her eyes. When she opened them again, resignation had replaced fear. "I knew Emily. Neither Holmes nor I spoke. I knew her personally." The admission hung heavily in the air. "You knew Lady Blackwood's mother?" I asked. "Yes." "How?" "I worked for her." The implications were enormous. This woman had not been a casual witness. She stood near the very center of the mystery. "Then you have been lying to us from the beginning," Holmes said. "No, not entirely. Perhaps not." She lowered her head. "I wanted to tell the truth. Yet, I was afraid." "Of Ashcombe?" "Yes." The name seemed to chill her, even now, after all these years. Holmes remained thoughtful. Then suddenly he smiled, a dangerous smile, the kind that appeared whenever he recognized a pattern. "Watson." "Yes, I believe we are finally approaching the truth." "You know who Ashcombe is?" "Not yet." "Then what do you know?" Holmes looked toward the fog. "Ashcombe's greatest deception." "And what is that?" "He convinced everyone he was the villain." I stared. "What?" Holmes nodded. "Consider it." The idea seemed absurd. Ashcombe had blackmailed Fairmont, threatened people, disappeared after the fire. His name appeared in every dark corner of the case. Surely he is involved. Oh, he is involved. Then what do you mean? Holmes's eyes narrowed. "I mean someone benefited enormously from Ashcombe becoming the monster in every story." The thought struck me immediately. A scapegoat, a convenient villain, someone upon whom every suspicion naturally settled. If Holmes was correct, then the true architect of the conspiracy remained hidden, and had remained hidden for more than 2 decades. A cold realization settled over me. Perhaps we had been asking the wrong question all along. Not, what did Ashcombe do, but who wanted everyone to believe Ashcombe did it? Before I could pursue the idea further, a carriage emerged from the fog. The driver reined in sharply. A messenger climbed down. "Mr. Holmes?" "Yes." The man handed over a sealed envelope. Holmes opened it immediately. As he read, something remarkable happened. His expression changed completely. Not surprise, not excitement. Recognition. The final piece. I knew it instantly. The look appeared only when a mystery that had resisted him suddenly yielded its secret. "What is it?" I asked. Holmes folded the letter carefully. For several seconds he said nothing. Then, "Watson." "Yes?" "I know where Lady Blackwood is." My heart leapt. "You do?" "Yes." "And the culprit?" His eyes shone in the fog. "I believe I know that as well." A long silence followed. Then Holmes looked toward Clara. "Miss Whitmore." "Yes?" "The game is over." She stared. "What do you mean?" Holmes's voice became very quiet. "Because the person behind all of this has finally made a mistake." The fog swirled around us. Somewhere in the distance, a clock struck midnight. And for the first time since the disappearance of Lady Blackwood, Sherlock Holmes looked like a man who had reached the end of the maze. Only one thing remained: to confront the architect of the mystery and reveal the terrible truth hidden behind the debt of Ravenshollow. Chapter 10. The Debt of Ravenshollow. I have often observed that the most dangerous moments in a criminal investigation do not occur when the detective lacks answers. They occur when he possesses them. A cornered criminal may behave with desperation. A criminal who believes himself safe may behave with confidence. But a criminal who realizes that the truth has been discovered becomes capable of almost anything. It was therefore with considerable concern that I accompanied Holmes back to Baker Street shortly after midnight. My companion remained in excellent spirits. Indeed, he appeared almost cheerful. This fact did little to ease my anxiety. "You know where Lady Blackwood is?" "I believe so." "You know the identity of the culprit?" "I believe so." "Then why not tell me?" Holmes removed his disguise and settled comfortably into his armchair. "Because I require your assistance." "You shall have it." "Excellent." "With what?" "A trap." "Naturally." Whenever Holmes approached the conclusion of a particularly complex case, some form of strategic maneuver inevitably followed. What sort of trap? The simplest kind, which is one that convinces the quarry it remains the hunter. Before I could question him further, Holmes crossed to his desk and began writing a series of notes. Several were addressed to Inspector Lestrade. Others bore unfamiliar names. Each was sealed immediately after completion. For nearly an hour he worked. At last he sat back. There. What now? We wait until morning. I slept poorly. The revelations concerning Emily Fairmont and Lady Blackwood had transformed every aspect of the mystery. Yet the central questions remained unanswered. What exactly had happened at Raven's Hollow? What debt required repayment after 23 years? And who stood behind the chain of disappearances and murder? The following morning brought little clarification. Holmes spent much of the day making arrangements. Messages arrived. Messages departed. Visitors came and went. Several conversations occurred behind closed doors. Whenever I attempted to extract information, Holmes responded with infuriating good humour. Patience, Watson. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, Inspector Lestrade arrived. The detective from Scotland Yard appeared both curious and irritated. A note arrives, ordering me to report here immediately. Holmes nodded. Excellent, excellent, Lestrade repeated. I abandoned 3 investigations. You may add a 4th. The inspector groaned. I knew it. Holmes gestured toward a chair. Sit down. Reluctantly, Lestrade complied. Moments later, Mrs. Hudson announced another visitor. The Earl of Blackwood entered. He looked exhausted. Days of uncertainty had clearly taken their toll. The moment he saw Lestrade, confusion crossed his face. Then he noticed Clara Whitmore. Confusion became alarm. Holmes observed everything, every glance, every reaction. Nothing escaped him. Lord Blackwood, he said pleasantly, thank you for coming. The Earl nodded stiffly. You said you had news. I do. About Eleanor? Yes. The room became utterly silent. Blackwood leaned forward. My wife lives. I believe so. Relief flooded his features. Yet Holmes continued watching him. Closely. Very closely. The Earl's relief appeared genuine. That fact seemed important. Where is she? We shall reach that point shortly. The Earl's expression darkened. What point? The truth. Holmes stood. For several moments he remained beside the fireplace. Then he turned. Lord Blackwood, do you know why this case proved so difficult? No, because it actually consists of 2 separate mysteries. The Earl frowned. I don't understand. Naturally. Holmes folded his hands behind his back. The first mystery concerns Lady Blackwood's disappearance. And the second? Events that occurred at Raven's Hollow 23 years ago. Lestrade shifted impatiently. Get on with it, Holmes. You shall have your explanation. Holmes smiled faintly, though perhaps not the one you expect. He crossed to a nearby table. Several documents lay arranged upon its surface. Among them were copies of Emily Fairmont's diary, the estate ledger, property records, and Victor Hale's final note. Holmes picked up the diary. Everyone assumed Emily Fairmont disappeared. She did disappear. Lestrade objected. Yes, but she survived. The inspector blinked. What? The Earl looked equally astonished. Holmes continued. Emily was abducted. By whom? Asked Blackwood. That question occupied us for some time. He placed the diary aside. Initially, suspicion fell upon Ashcombe. Naturally. Lestrade nodded. The blackmailer. Exactly. Holmes picked up the ledger. Everything pointed toward him. The money, the threats, the arguments, the disappearance. Holmes smiled. Far too convenient. The inspector frowned. What are you saying? I am saying that Ashcombe was not the principal villain. A long silence followed. The statement landed like a stone dropped into still water. But he blackmailed Fairmont, I said. Certainly. He threatened him. Yes. Then he was guilty. Of many things. Holmes's expression sharpened, but not of the crime everyone remembered. The room fell silent. Then Holmes picked up another document, a property transfer record. "This," he said, "contains the key." He handed it to Lestrade. The inspector studied it. Several seconds passed. Then, "I don't see anything unusual." "Look closer." Lestrade frowned. At last his eyes widened. What the devil? The property had changed ownership shortly after the fire, when Ravenshollow Manor passed from the Fairmont estate into Blackwood control. The price paid appeared astonishingly low, far below market value, almost absurdly low. The Earl looked startled. "My father purchased Ravenshollow?" "Yes." "You think that significant?" "Extremely." Holmes turned toward him. "Tell me, Lord Blackwood." "Yes?" "Did your father ever discuss Augustus Fairmont?" "No." "Never?" "No." Holmes nodded. "As I expected." The Earl shifted uneasily. "Expected? Because your father had every reason to remain silent." Lestrade looked confused. "I still don't follow." Holmes faced us all. Then he spoke the words that transformed the entire case. Augustus Fairmont was being blackmailed because he knew the truth about Emily's abduction. The room froze. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Holmes continued. "He did not arrange the kidnapping." "Then what?" I asked. "He witnessed part of it." My pulse quickened. The truth was finally emerging. "Who kidnapped Emily?" Lestrade demanded. Holmes's eyes moved slowly around the room, then stopped. Not on Lestrade, not on Clara, not on me, on Lord Blackwood. The Earl stared back, puzzled, uncertain, then gradually afraid. Holmes's voice became very quiet. "That," he said, "is the question your father spent 23 years trying to bury." A terrible silence followed. Even the fire seemed to burn more softly. The Earl rose slowly. "My father?" "Yes." "No." Holmes held his gaze. "Your father knew exactly what happened at Ravenshollow." The Earl's face had become pale. "What are you accusing him of?" "Nothing." Holmes paused, then added, "Yet." The word hung in the air like the first distant rumble of thunder before a storm, and at that moment I realized that the mystery of Ravenshollow had reached its most dangerous stage. For Holmes was no longer merely investigating a disappearance. He was preparing to expose a secret protected by one of England's most powerful families for more than 2 decades, and before the evening ended, that secret would finally emerge into the light. Chapter 11. The Hidden Heir. The silence that followed Holmes's accusation seemed almost tangible. Lord Blackwood remained standing beside his chair. His face had gone deathly pale. Inspector Lestrade stared between the two men in bewilderment. Clara Whitmore lowered her eyes. Only Holmes appeared entirely composed. The fire crackled softly. Outside, rain tapped against the windows of Baker Street. Within that familiar room, years of deception were beginning to unravel. At length, Lord Blackwood spoke. "My father has been dead for nearly 15 years. "Yes." "And yet you suggest he was involved in all this." "I suggest," Holmes replied calmly, "that he possessed knowledge which others believed had died with him." The Earl swallowed. "You think he kidnapped Emily Fairmont?" "No." The answer came immediately. "Then what?" Holmes folded his hands behind his back. "He discovered the kidnapping after it occurred." A long pause followed. "And concealed it." The Earl sank slowly back into his chair. "No." "I am afraid so." Lestrade shook his head. "This makes no sense." "Only because you lack several pieces of the puzzle." Holmes crossed to the table. There he arranged various documents into a careful sequence. "The story begins long before Emily vanished." He tapped the earliest paper. "A partnership. Between whom?" I asked. "Augustus Fairmont and Arthur Blackwood." The Earl looked up sharply. "My father?" "Yes." Holmes handed him a business agreement. "I found this yesterday among county archives." The Earl examined it silently. His expression grew increasingly troubled. "My father never mentioned Fairmont." I imagine he avoided the subject whenever possible. Holmes picked up another document. A number of investments linked the two families. Business ventures? Precisely. Successful? Very. Then Holmes paused. Until they ceased being successful. The atmosphere changed instantly. How? Asked Lestrade. Fraud. The word struck like a hammer blow. Nobody spoke. Holmes continued. Several investments collapsed. Whose fault? I asked. Neither man's. He tapped the ledger. A third party manipulated the accounts. Ashcombe, Lestrade said confidently. Holmes smiled. No. The inspector groaned. Then why is he involved in everything? Because he discovered the fraud. The room fell silent again. Suddenly Ashcombe's role appeared very different. Not the architect. The witness. The man who knew too much. Ashcombe uncovered the scheme, Holmes explained. He threatened exposure. Which explains the payments, I said. Exactly. Holmes nodded approvingly. For years, Fairmont paid him for silence. But who committed the fraud? Asked the Earl. Holmes looked toward him. The same person who later abducted Emily. The Earl stared. Lestrade stared. I stared. Yet Holmes remained silent. Deliberately, building the tension. At length Clara whispered, You know. Yes. Her face tightened. I thought you might. Holmes inclined his head. Then he turned toward Lord Blackwood. Tell me. The Earl blinked. Tell you what? Did your father ever speak of a man named Henry Voss? The reaction was immediate. Not recognition. Confusion. No. Holmes nodded. I expected as much. He crossed to his desk. From a locked drawer he withdrew a photograph. An old photograph, faded with age. He handed it to Lestrade. Observe the gentleman standing beside Fairmont. The inspector studied it. A clerk, perhaps. Perhaps. Holmes smiled. His name was Henry Voss. The photograph passed from hand to hand. The man appeared ordinary, middle-aged, respectable, forgettable, exactly the sort of individual one might overlook, which, I suspected, formed part of the point. What happened to him? I asked. Holmes's eyes gleamed. He vanished. The answer sent a chill through me. Another disappearance. Another missing figure. Another shadow connected to Ravenshollow. When? Asked Lestrade. Shortly before Emily disappeared. The inspector frowned. Convenient. Very. Holmes picked up Victor Hale's note. The references to the cellar, the blue lantern, the debt, the disappearances, they all point toward the same conclusion. He paused. Then, someone feared what Emily knew. A heavy silence followed. The logic seemed unavoidable. Emily had witnessed something, learned something, discovered something. Whatever it was, it had altered the course of many lives. What did she know? I asked. Holmes looked toward Clara. You may tell them. The woman hesitated, then slowly nodded. I learned it from Emily herself. No one interrupted. Several weeks before she disappeared, Emily overheard a conversation. Between whom? Asked Lestrade. Her father and Henry Voss. Holmes nodded. Continue. They were arguing. About the fraud? Yes. Clara's voice trembled. Emily heard Voss threaten them. Them, I repeated. Fairmont and Blackwood. The Earl closed his eyes. A look of profound distress crossed his face. My God, Holmes continued gently. Voss believed he deserved a share. A share of what? The stolen money. The room fell silent. The picture had begun forming. Not clearly, but enough to glimpse its shape. Voss had manipulated accounts. Ashcombe discovered it. Fairmont learned the truth. Blackwood learned the truth. And somewhere amid the chaos, Emily overheard something she should never have heard. What happened next? I asked. Clara's expression darkened. Emily disappeared. Kidnapped by Voss? Yes. The answer came instantly. The room erupted. Lestrade stood abruptly. Then that's it. No, Holmes replied. It isn't. The inspector threw up his hands. Why not? Because Henry Voss died 22 years ago. Silence. What? Lestrade asked. He died. Then who? Precisely. Holmes folded his arms. The obvious culprit is impossible. The inspector sat down again, utterly bewildered. I confess I felt little better. Holmes turned toward the window. For several moments he stared into the rain. Then he spoke quietly. Henry Voss committed the original crime. Emily's kidnapping? Yes. The fraud? Yes. The blackmail? No. That answer surprised everyone. Ashcombe conducted the blackmail. Then what happened afterward? Holmes faced us. His eyes seemed unusually intense. Voss died. How? A fall. The word struck me instantly. The same explanation that had appeared among the conflicting records. The accidental death. The inconsistency. The hidden truth. Suddenly I understood. Not an accident. Holmes smiled faintly. No. The realization spread across the room. Someone had killed Henry Voss. And everything that followed grew from that moment. The fraud, the kidnapping, the cover-up, the silence, the debt, all connected. Yet one question remained, the most important question of all. Who killed him? I asked. Holmes looked directly at me, then at Lestrade, then at Lord Blackwood, finally at Clara. His voice became almost a whisper. The same person who murdered Victor Hale. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The room seemed frozen in anticipation. At last, Lestrade spoke. Then you know who it is. Holmes nodded. Yes. The inspector leaned forward. Who? Holmes glanced at the clock. 6 o'clock. Exactly. A faint smile appeared. Perfect timing. A knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered. There's a lady here to see you, Mr. Holmes. The detective's smile widened. Excellent. The room fell silent. Mrs. Hudson stepped aside. A woman entered, elegant, composed, very much alive. Lord Blackwood rose so abruptly that his chair overturned. Eleanor, Lady Blackwood stood in the doorway, pale, exhausted, yet unmistakably alive. The Earl rushed forward. For several moments neither spoke. The reunion seemed genuine, deeply genuine. Holmes watched quietly. Then Lady Blackwood looked toward him. You were right. I am pleased to hear it. Her gaze shifted around the room. Finally she whispered, Is it over? Holmes's expression became grave. Almost. The room fell silent. For everyone understood. Lady Blackwood's arrival meant the final act had begun. The missing witness had returned. The truth stood ready to emerge. And somewhere very close, far closer than any of us yet realized, the true architect of the Ravenshollow conspiracy awaited exposure. The debt of Ravenshollow was finally coming due. Chapter 12. The Final Reckoning. There are moments in every great investigation when the accumulated weight of clues, contradictions, and mysteries suddenly converges into a single, undeniable truth. For Sherlock Holmes, that moment had arrived. For the rest of us, it was only beginning. Lady Eleanor Blackwood's appearance transformed the atmosphere of Baker Street instantly. Relief, shock, confusion, all mingled together. Lord Blackwood remained beside his wife, scarcely able to believe she truly stood before him. Yet Holmes did not allow sentiment to delay matters. Too much remained unresolved. Too many questions demanded answers, and somewhere beyond the comfort of Baker Street, a murderer still believed himself secure. Eleanor, said the Earl quietly, where have you been? Lady Blackwood lowered herself into a chair. The exhaustion visible upon her face suggested days of fear and uncertainty. Hiding. From whom? Her eyes drifted toward Holmes. Then, from the person who killed Victor Hale. Silence followed. The statement carried immense weight. Holmes nodded. Precisely. Lestrade leaned forward impatiently. Can someone finally explain what is happening? Holmes smiled faintly. With pleasure. He moved toward the fireplace. The familiar posture was one I had witnessed many times. Whenever Holmes reached the conclusion of a case, he became not merely a detective, but a lecturer. The tangled threads of mystery would now be untied, one by one. Let us begin with Emily Fairmont. The room fell silent. 23 years ago, Emily overheard evidence of financial fraud. He glanced toward Lady Blackwood. "Correct?" She nodded. Her father, Augustus Fairmont, discovered the fraud as well. Holmes continued. "Unfortunately, so did Henry Voss." "The man responsible," Lestrade muttered. "Yes," Holmes folded his arms. "Voss realized Emily could expose him." "And kidnapped her, precisely." The detective paced slowly. "For several years Emily remained hidden." "Where?" asked the Earl. "We shall come to that," Holmes continued. "Eventually Voss lost control of the situation." "How?" "Because someone killed him." The room grew still. "The fall," I said. "Exactly." Holmes nodded. "The supposed accident." Lestrade frowned. "You said the killer murdered Hale too." "I did." "Then who was it?" Holmes raised a finger. "Patience." The inspector groaned audibly. Holmes ignored him. "After Voss died, Emily escaped." "Under a different name," Lady Blackwood said quietly. "Yes." Holmes smiled. "You know much of the story already." She nodded. "My mother told me everything." The room remained silent. For a moment, I reflected upon the tragedy. A child stolen from her family, a lifetime spent hiding, a secret carried to the grave, and a daughter left to uncover the truth decades later. Holmes resumed. Emily rebuilt her life, married, had a daughter. He inclined his head toward Lady Blackwood. "Eleanor." The Earl squeezed his wife's hand. Holmes continued. "For many years the secret remained buried, until Eleanor discovered it." "Precisely." Lady Blackwood looked down. "My mother left letters." "Which led you to Ravenshollow?" "Yes." Holmes nodded, and unfortunately attracted attention. The atmosphere darkened. Everyone understood what came next. The kidnappings, the threats, the murder, the modern crimes. Someone had been protecting the old secret, desperately, violently. Victor Hale learned the truth as well, Holmes said. "Yes," replied Lady Blackwood. "He helped me." The statement surprised us. Holmes, however, merely nodded. "As I suspected." Lestrade looked annoyed. "You suspected everything." "Not everything." Holmes smiled. "Merely enough." He picked up Victor Hale's final note. The references to Emily, the cellar, the warnings. They were attempts to expose the conspiracy, which got him killed, I said. "Exactly." Holmes set the note aside. Then his expression changed. The warmth vanished. The amusement vanished. What remained was the cold precision of a man approaching the final truth. And now, we reach the most important question. Nobody spoke. The room seemed to hold its breath. Who benefited from keeping the secret buried? Holmes looked toward Lord Blackwood. The Earl stiffened. Yet Holmes shook his head. Not the Blackwood family. Relief crossed the Earl's face. Then who? Holmes smiled. A question I asked myself repeatedly. He moved toward the window. Rain continued falling outside. The answer revealed itself through a simple observation. "What observation?" I asked. "The velvet." My pulse quickened. "The black velvet fragment. The piece found in Ravenshollow. The matching piece found in Whitechapel. The clue we had nearly forgotten." Holmes reached into his pocket. The fragment appeared once more. "This belonged to a woman." "Clara Whitmore?" asked Lestrade. "No." The inspector blinked. "No?" Holmes shook his head. "Miss Whitmore feared the conspiracy. She did not lead it." The room grew very still. Holmes turned slowly. His eyes settled upon a single person, Lady Blackwood. The silence became absolute. For a moment no one understood. Then the implication arrived. The Earl stared. Clara stared. Lestrade stared. Lady Blackwood herself remained motionless. "Holmes," I said carefully, "you cannot mean—" "I do." The detective's voice remained calm, the architect of the modern crimes, the individual who arranged Victor Hale's murder, the individual who staged her own disappearance, the individual who manipulated every player in this drama. He paused. Then, Lady Eleanor Blackwood. The room erupted. "No!" shouted the Earl. Lestrade sprang to his feet. Clara gasped. Only Holmes remained calm. Lady Blackwood sat perfectly still. Then slowly, she smiled. The expression transformed her completely. The frightened victim vanished. In her place appeared someone colder, sharper, far more dangerous. "Remarkable," she said quietly. The Earl stared in horror. "Eleanor?" She did not look at him. Her eyes remained fixed upon Holmes. "When did you know?" Holmes folded his arms. "The moment I realized your disappearance was impossible." A long silence followed. Then Lady Blackwood laughed softly. "Not with madness, with admiration. Go on." Holmes obliged. "You wished everyone to believe you had been abducted." "Naturally." "Yet there were no signs of struggle." "No." "No preparations for travel." "No." "No evidence anyone entered the room." She smiled. "You noticed." "I noticed something more important." "What?" "The room was designed as a mystery." Holmes's eyes hardened. "Too carefully designed." The realization struck me instantly. Of course, the locked room, the clues, the warning letter, every element had been crafted, manufactured, created, not by a kidnapper, by Eleanor herself. "Why?" whispered the Earl. For the first time, sadness crossed her face. "Because I wanted the truth." "The truth? About my mother?" Her voice trembled slightly. "You cannot imagine what it means to discover your entire life was built upon lies." No one answered. "Perhaps because none of us could." She continued, "I searched for years. Eventually I learned everything. About Voss, about Ravenshollow, about the fraud." Her eyes darkened. "And about the person who killed him." Holmes nodded slowly. "Which was not your mother." "No." "Nor Ashcombe." "No." The detective's gaze sharpened. "It was Augustus Fairmont." A collective gasp filled the room. The revelation struck like lightning. Emily's own father, the victim, the grieving parent, the man everyone pitied. He had killed Henry Voss. Holmes continued. "Fairmont murdered Voss during a confrontation. He concealed the truth. Ashcombe discovered it, and blackmailed him for years." The entire puzzle suddenly aligned. Every contradiction, every inconsistency, every hidden motive. Lady Blackwood closed her eyes. "My grandfather destroyed countless lives." "Yes," Holmes nodded. "But he did not arrange Emily's kidnapping." "No." The tragedy became clearer. Fairmont had been both victim and criminal, a grieving father and a killer, a complicated truth buried beneath decades of lies. Then Holmes spoke quietly. "Yet none of that explains Victor Hale." The room became still again. Lady Blackwood opened her eyes. "No, because Victor Hale learned what you intended." She did not answer. "Your disappearance was designed to draw attention." Still silence. "You intended to expose the secret publicly." "Yes." "But Hale threatened your plan." Her gaze hardened. "Yes. And so you arranged his death." The words fell like stones. At last she nodded. The confession was almost imperceptible, yet unmistakable. The room seemed frozen. Lord Blackwood looked shattered. Clara looked horrified. Lestrade reached slowly toward his handcuffs. Holmes remained silent. After a long moment, Lady Blackwood spoke. "I never intended anyone else to die." "Nevertheless," Holmes replied softly, "someone did." The rain continued outside. The fire burned low. And at last the debt of Ravenshollow had been paid. Not through revenge, not through violence, but through truth. A truth hidden for 23 years, a truth that had consumed generations, a truth that Sherlock Holmes and Sherlock Holmes alone had finally brought into the light. As I watched Lestrade step forward and place a hand upon Lady Blackwood's shoulder, I could not help reflecting upon Holmes's frequent observation that the past is never truly dead. It merely waits, patiently, silently, until the moment arrives when it can no longer remain buried. And few cases demonstrated that lesson more completely than the disappearance of Lady Blackwood. For beneath every mystery lies a human story, and beneath every human story lies the truth, no matter how deeply it has been hidden. The end.